My name is Christy Greener. I am a clinical psychologist and student counselor based in the College of Health Sciences. Some of you may have seen me at previous meetings where I have presented, and I will give my colleague, Nandi, time to introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am no stranger to the PGA Academy program myself, but for those of you who are not familiar with my face, my name is Nandi Njangase. I'm a counseling psychologist and I coordinate the LMMS group. Thank you.
Okay, so today our topic is, given that it is World Mental Health Month, we are looking at suicide today and about choosing life and saying no to suicide. And this is a topic that's very close to my heart. I am a survivor. I lost a family member to suicide. So this is a topic that's very close to my heart. I'm very passionate about work around suicide. I'm very passionate about openness around suicide and being willing to talk about these issues related to suicide and suicide awareness, because it's such an important topic. And often it doesn't get spoken about, either because we are afraid that perhaps if we talk about the subject, we might be encouraging people to do it, or because of the certain stigmas that are attached to mental health, mental illness, and that are attached to suicide. So it is a very important topic, and it is very important to have these open-ended conversations around suicide and suicide awareness. So just some brief definitions to get us going. So what's going to happen today is I'm just going to get us going by looking at a few definitions in terms of suicide versus non-suicidal behavior and gestures. And then Nandi's going to come in and look at the risk factors associated with suicide. I am then going to come back and look at certain myths that surround suicide and suicide awareness. And then Nandi is going to look at supporting people who have suicidal ideation, and also resources that can be incorporated into the support of yourself or friends and family who have these issues. So sit back, please post any questions or comments in the chat space. Let us know what you're thinking. Let us know what you're feeling. Anything, this is a very informal session. It's a very, we like to hear other people's voices. We don't just like to hear our voices. So please, if you've got questions, if you've got comments, please post them in the chat space. You can post them in the public forum, or you can post them privately to Nandi and myself, and we will read them out without identifying your name. Okay, so as you're probably aware, when we talk about suicidal behavior, we are talking about things that are intended to cause deliberate loss of life. So we might be talking about an overdose, or some sort of self-harm, or some sort of other injurious behavior that tends to, the aim of engaging in such behavior is to end one's life. And that is what we would call suicidal behavior, okay? But then you also get a branch of, which is called non-suicidal self-injury. And these behaviors, for example, cutting, burning, etc., are there, but they're used as a coping mechanism. So a person may be experiencing high levels of pain or anguish, psychological pain, and in order to alleviate that pain or that anguish, or to cope with the world around them, they will engage in these self-harming behaviors. And I want to just touch on the fact that in society, these behaviors get a negative rap, in that, oh, she's just doing it for attention, is a lot of things that I get held. This person is doing it because they're attention seeking. And in a certain way they are, but not in the negative way that society has, advocated for. So often a person who engages in these behaviors is doing so because they simply don't know what else to do. It seems it's a way of coping. It's the only method they have of dealing with this unimaginable pain. Sometimes it's because, you know, with physical pain, it will heal and it will go away. Whereas with psychological pain, sometimes it feels like it cannot be healed. Like it's just, and they get to such a dark and helpless place that the only way out is to inflict these injuries. Often it is used as a cry for help. So people who engage in these behaviors are often looking for help, are looking for support, and perhaps don't know how to go about doing it in another way. So they will deliberately injure themselves. So the difference between suicidal and non-suicidal behavior is to do with intent. Is the person intending to bring about his or her own death, or is it related to a coping mechanism? And I'm not going to go into the nuances of assessing suicide risk, etc., but just to say that, you know, some people may have suicidal thoughts, we call them ideation. So a person may have thoughts of wanting to die, but they may not have a formed plan or an idea of when or where they're going to do it. Other people may have suicidal ideation where they have a formed plan, where they know when and where and how they're going to do it. So it depends on the level of severity in terms of the level of risk. So that is where I'm going to end, because I don't want to get too technical and go into a lot of. So basically, I just wanted to highlight the difference between suicidal and non-suicidal behavior. Nandi, over to you with I think we're doing risk factors now.
Yes, so as Christy has mentioned, that suicide is a deliberate loss of life, meaning that the person would have gone through an extensive amount of time thinking about it, and perhaps at time would have started planning on how to go about achieving such, or they would have had what we would call negative intrusive thoughts that would encourage the act to be done deliberately. There are suicide risk factors, or what we would call, or what we would in other words call biopsychosocial factors that could be an indicator of either predisposal factors or precipitating factors that encourage or become the catalyst of one having to deliberately perform, go to an extent of deliberately performing such an act. And these are the factors that I'll be discussing with you. Number one, we have, they can either occur singularly, or in most cases, it would be a variety of factors that are all in one place. For instance, it's rare where you'd find a person who's only just going through a relationship breakup, for instance, who then find themselves having suicidal thought. Maybe you'd find that that person has previously maybe gone through a traumatic experience, or it's coexisting along with the breakup, or they're still dealing with or maybe there's some financial aspects that are contributing or are parallel with the problem of the relationship breakup. So number one, it would be mental health issues like bipolar disorder, depression, and anxiety disorder, or any other form of mental illness, maybe such as even personality disorders like borderline personality, where one would find themselves having erratic thoughts that would encourage impulsive behaviors. And then the second factor highlights that there could also be Factors such as gender-based violence or domestic abuse or any other form of abuse in a relationship could very well be a contributing factor to suicide risk. And then thirdly, we have physical health conditions like a terminal illness or a chronic illness. I can imagine if one is diagnosed with a terminally ill diagnosis, where they now are made aware that they have a certain amount of time to live, or there'll be certain activities that they may no longer be able to do, whether it's with their families or with themselves. For instance, or maybe even with the act or the constant experience of having to undergo treatment. So all of those things could produce thoughts or emotions such as hopelessness, helplessness, that could trigger one to, end up having to feel like there's nothing more to their lives but just to wait for death. And then there's also a factor where if one has experienced a recent trauma or life crisis, like a death of a loved one, that also is a contributing factor. Because, with grief process, there would be mental illnesses that would evoke or that would come about during the grief process, maybe such as depression or anxiety, but often depression. Another contributing factor would be experiences or uncomfortable experiences such as work stress, or one feeling bullied either at work or in any other context in their lives, unemployment or job loss. Also, relationship issues could very well be precipitating factors, when one would be experiencing a tumultuous relationship, or there's a separation or divorce, or there's a certain extensive conflict that is occurring that could evoke an already existing mental illness in an individual, or could cause standalone suicidal thoughts or ideations. And then there's also financial problems, or if one finds themselves being under debt when they feel that they can't get themselves out of a certain situation, they feel stuck. And also we know that finances are a part, or a very big part of life. They drive a person's needs in their overall, in most of their overall well-being. For instance, you do need finances in order to study, to continue with your studies. As a postgraduate, you do need finances to take care of yourself, your family. So it could very well be a strong contributing factor if one is finding themselves having to struggle financially, especially when there's no social support structure, or there's just no other means, even after having exhausted all their avenues of trying to receive help financially. And then lastly, A person's history is also an important contributing factor. It matters whether a person has experienced, maybe has either witnessed or has a family member who has passed on due to suicide, because it is believed that then that person, because that act of suicide is no longer has an unfamiliar weight on them, then it could possibly be that to a great extent they might find it somewhat easier for them to also perform the same act as, maybe, let's say, if the person whom has committed suicide successfully was maybe, say, one of their parents or their sibling. So should they find themselves in difficult or challenging situations, not to say that it is most likely that that could happen, but research has shown that such experiences, historical experiences, could also be contributing factors to a person having to find themselves having suicidal thoughts or attempts. I think I'll hand over to Chris as she discusses the suicide truths and myths.
Thanks, Dandy. Thanks for that. So something I forgot to highlight earlier is I was looking at suicide stats, and what I found very concerning was a report from SADAG, which is the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. And SADAG said that there are 23 completed suicides every day in South Africa, and there are 230 attempts made each and every day, which is quite an alarming figure. And I think suicide, in terms of the causes of death, is growing higher and higher. It's going higher up the list. I don't, unfortunately, right now have where it is currently listed in the world. I'm sure if someone did a quick Google search, they could probably find that, but I know that it is increasing in alarm. And one of the factors, we think of suicide as a young people's thing, teenagers and young people, but in actual fact, they're finding that age is also people who go on to commit suicide, that the older you get, the higher the risk. So it seems to be that suicide, the risk of it is also increasing with age, interestingly enough, because you think of young people and teenagers, etc., who are committing suicide, but the research is actually showing that people in the 45 to 64 year age category are actually at a greater risk of committing suicide. Obviously, that with men, with the stats in terms of men and women are maybe more likely to attempt suicide, but men are more likely to complete suicide. And that has to do with the choice of means of committing suicide. So in terms of shooting, hanging, etc., where women would take perhaps the overdose or not, which doesn't necessarily mean that they wouldn't engage in shooting or hanging, but it means that often the method chosen is less lethal, or I don't know what the word would be, but it's not, with men, they tend to go for the more lethal option of ending their lives. So age and gender are also a risk factor for suicide, believe it or not. So now we're looking at the myths surrounding suicide, and with mental health in general, there are a lot of myths and stigmas, and I'm going to go through 8 common myths. But if you think of any other myths or stigmas that I don't touch on, I would love to know from you, and you can, while I go through my myths, put in the chat space myths that you've heard about suicide, or any questions that you may have that you would like to ask us about things that you've heard about suicide. So the first myth that I'm going to touch on is that talking about suicide, if you talk to someone who is suicidal about suicide, you encourage them. And research shows that that's actually not true, that if you talk to someone who is suicidal and ask them directly if they are thinking of hurting themselves or killing themselves, it actually reduces their risk if they open up, because it opens a door. It allows the person to talk about those feelings and thoughts. Often people have them and they're very ashamed of them, so they don't talk about them. But when you open a door and you ask someone directly, are you having these thoughts? It frees them up to be able to admit to you that, yes, I am. And often it allows them, to be presented with an alternate view of their circumstances. And it also increases the likelihood that they will receive treatment. So talking about suicide or asking persons directly about suicide is not something that you should avoid. Something that if you are concerned about someone who perhaps is not doing well, about hurting yourself, get it out there and then take it from there. The second myth is that people who talk about suicide don't go through with it. And that is not true. Research shows that actually those who have completed suicide have told at least one person in the past that they wanted to die. So you should always take seriously any person who talks to you about wanting to end their life or wanting to kill themselves.
Whilst we're waiting for Chris to go through the next myth and truth, I'm just curious to know, what do you guys think? Do you think you would be able to gain the bravery to directly ask someone if they're being suicidal, or would it be a matter of you respecting their privacy? What do you think? Or how would the approach be like?
So while you're thinking about that, I will give you the next myth. And that has to do with the fact that suicide can't be prevented. And it definitely can be. People who experience suicidal ideation are often experiencing very negative and intense emotions. And like I said earlier, talking about them, getting them to open up and express themselves, and also getting them help, referring them to appropriate sources. Treatment does work. So getting them, if it's a psychiatric illness, for example, to see a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a mental health care practitioner, can definitely prevent the loss of a life. The next myth is that people who commit suicide are selfish or cowardly. And again, that is not true. Okay. Often people who commit suicide just simply cannot see a way out of the situation. They cannot see another way out of the situation. And so they act on this intense feeling of hopelessness and helplessness. And often there are things that they will tell themselves, okay? We call them cognitive distortions, So things that myths that they will tell, that, for example, my family will be much better without me because I'm such a burden. Okay. And speaking from personal experience, I can tell you that your family is definitely not better without you. It is a highly traumatic situation, experience to lose a family member to suicide. And it is in no way any sort of reassurance, or it doesn't make life any better or easier, or in any case, it is a very difficult thing to come through as a family, as an individual member of the family. So it's important to realize that these people that engage in these behaviors are simply doing it because they don't know what else to do. Sorry about that. Another myth is that removing access to lethal things such as firearms, etc., don't necessarily work. And that's not true. Sometimes just eliminating a person's access to such firearms, poisons, medications, etc., can really do a lot to reduce their risk. It does not guarantee that a person will not find another way of killing themselves or trying to kill themselves, but it is something that can be done. It can really help in certain cases just to remove their ability to gain access to means by which they can hurt themselves. The next myth relates to sorry, I've just gone blank. Yeah, it relates to that there are no warning signs about a person that wants to commit suicide, or they don't give out any warning signs. That's not necessarily true. And I think Nandi is going to look at that. So I'm not going to run through the warning signs that go with potential suicide, but it's often people do give indication of some sign that they are not coping and that they are thinking of ending their lives. There's one last myth. I'll be back in 1 minute. So the last myth is that medication and talk therapy don't work. And that is not true. Research shows that definitely treatment does work, and medications can assist in terms of, if you're looking at a psychiatric illness, a mental illness, medication definitely has a part to play, but also looking at engaging in psychotherapy. In psychotherapy, we look at different ways of coping. We look at different ways of seeing the situation. We look at different ways of understanding, all looking at, it's a very empathetic, the therapist is a very empathic person that's looking at it, is trying to put themselves in the shoes of the client that they are seeing. So they are trying to understand things from your point of view, but also try and expose you to other ways of viewing the situation and other possible coping mechanisms and solutions. And it's about finding solutions together. And the first treatment that you may engage in may not necessarily be the one that works for you, but that doesn't mean that no treatment will ever work for you. It's about finding the right, in some cases, it's about finding the right type of medication, because there are different kinds of meds there, and I'm sure you're probably aware of this, but there are different types of psychiatric meds, and sometimes it's about finding the right combination or finding the right meds that work for you. And also therapists. The first therapist you may speak to may not necessarily be someone that you connect with. With a therapist, you've got to make sure that you connect with them, that you are able to share and feel that you are not being judged, and that the person is truly understanding and hearing you, not just hearing in terms of listening, but actively hearing what you're saying and reflecting and understanding you. So it's important to know that just because perhaps one medication doesn't work, or you don't connect well with your first therapist, it doesn't necessarily mean that all the treatment is not going to work. It's about working and working with your mental health care practitioners to find solutions, to say, go back to, if you're on medication, to go back to your doctors and say, listen, I don't think this is really helping me. I'm still experiencing these symptoms. Or to go to your therapist and honestly have an honest conversation with them and say to them, listen, I don't feel like we're connecting, or I feel in some ways that perhaps you are not hearing me, or that you are not judging me. So it depends. It really depends. You should never ever give up. And if you've got somebody who's on treatment, who's in treatment, and perhaps it's not going so well, just keep them motivated, keep the faith. So I don't know, are there any other myths that you guys can think of that I haven't touched on? Nuns, you'll have to man the chat space for me. My software has stopped working.
Don't worry, I'm on it. There's no messages yet.
Okay.
Are there any other myths or
any other myths or things that you've heard that you want to ask us about? Like, is this true? Is this feel free. This is a safe environment. There's no judgment. If you've got a question that you want to ask us, by all means ask us. We will do our best to answer.
okay. Has anyone reflected on the question that I also had earlier regarding directly asking someone or showing support for someone who is indicating signs of being suicidal? How would you go about approaching it? There's no wrong or right answer. This is a learning space. So you feel free to give us your answer. Okay, so whilst you're thinking about the myths and also my question, I will move on to discussing the warning signs and resources of suicide. So as I think Chris had mentioned earlier, that not everyone who is considering suicide will say so, and not everyone who Chris did not mention this, but I think it's along the lines of when she mentioned that often people, they do say if they are suicidal, but also, so this is the extension of that statement. that in my addition to say that not everyone who is considering suicide may necessarily go continuously on about them being suicidal, and not everyone who threatens suicide will follow through with it. However, threat of suicide should be taken seriously. They should be taken seriously. There's always signs, there's always, whether one would be saying something just randomly, whether it's during a gathering or they say something to a close loved one or a friend. Especially, I think, when it's just those sudden changes that that you would notice about a person. I think those things are the onset, or they indicate some form of concerns that you should be concerned about around suicide. So these are I just have a few points on the warning signs, right? First one would be if you notice that there's long-lasting sadness or mood swings, whether it's with you personally or with a loved one, they just alterating moods from being sad, and then the next thing they are happy. So that's the first sign. And then secondly, it would be when you find that a loved one or yourself would find yourself being socially withdrawn all of a sudden. You're not interested in hanging out with your peers, or maybe finding yourself desiring to be absent from work, or not really doing your daily task, or attending to your daily meetings as you would usually do so. Having a loss of interest in things that you usually enjoy. Changes in personality, appearance. All of a sudden you're unkempt. There's not much cleanliness or neatness in your appearance. Often sleeping, or even the eating patterns would start changing. And I think, as Chris had mentioned earlier, when there's now suddenly indications of self-harm behaviors, like overly drinking alcohol, and maybe sometimes drinking and driving, having unsafe sex, increased uses of drugs or alcohol. And I think there's always a two-way effect when it comes to especially with the use of drugs or alcohol, because they are psychedelics. So it could either be one would be already suicidal and they are utilizing such, or because they are utilizing such, and we know how they have chemicals that are mood alterating, that too can cause, or maybe substances such as marijuana, that too can be a contributing factor to one finding themselves suicidal. And then when you suddenly find one making preparations like putting personal business in order, or making a will, or visiting long lost friends and family members, giving away personal possessions, Maybe one might ask, but that's not it's not a problem. It's not that much of a problem if you're visiting, you know, loved ones or family or friends. I think you, if you are the observer of such behavior, that would it would then be of assistance, very much of assistance to you to not just base your assumption of maybe someone is being suicidal just because they are suddenly maybe calling you out of the blues and telling you how much they appreciate you. It would be safer not to just single out just that one act and then assume that this person is suicidal, but rather collect a variety of other unusual or odd behaviors that they are engaging in that will then support your assumption around this, or solidify the assumption around if this person is really suicidal or not. And then talking about death, and maybe saying things like, I want to die, or I wish I could disappear, or the world could be better without me, or what's the point? Nothing will ever change. You know, when a person suddenly expressing words that are implying defeat, that are implying hopelessness and helplessness around their current struggle, or just their lives in general, when it feels like when I think you always have that hunch, that instinct, especially if you are someone who pays attention to detail. That's why I think it's advisable that you do learn to find a more empathetic way of approaching the person, so that you can provide support, if especially if their statements are not as direct as I want to die, or the world would be better without me. Maybe if someone just says, I wish I could disappear, maybe probing further. Then lastly, assessing, when a person suddenly assessing lethal means like buying a gun, or stocking on pills, or having sudden secretive behaviors, you know, these sudden plans, or very suspicious moves, that especially if you know the person very well, if they're suddenly becoming very suspicious with things that they are suddenly researching on, or questions that they are asking that are surrounding tools, or that could be lethal. And of course, there are times where people will report the suicidal thought or ideation or attempt themselves directly. So those are the factors, and they are so but luckily there are resources, right? There are resources that one could use or attempt to approach, so that they can be able to help the other person, or even help themselves. Here on the slide, I have the SADC helpline, which is open 24 hours. So one would not have to feel like they are out of options, even if it occurs after work hours. And then during work hours, at College of Health Science, we have student support service that is consisting of student counselors. These are the ones based in Durban, and then we also have ones that are based in the DCTP counselors. And how would you be able to help or further extend your help on other people or another loved one? First and foremost, just recognize that everyone responds differently to stress and or grief, or grieve differently to loss. So you don't have to expect that just because maybe you or you've experienced someone else experiencing a stressful situation, and they managed to cope well with it, and find and still be able to develop healthy functional thoughts and behaviors during their challenges, doesn't mean that it would be the same for another person. There could be so many factors that could contribute to one developing suicidal thoughts. It could either be precipitating factors or traumatic experiences that could take place as the person is developing in their stages of life. It was interesting to even hear when Christy said that stats mentioned that the age group is also a factor around which population experiences suicidal more than the other group. So number 2, let the person know that you care about them, and let them know that they're not alone, especially if they've reported to you directly. If you've noticed some signs, having to create that safe space for them, and not judge them or not approach them with the sense of wanting to impose certain beliefs or actions to them, but rather being just there to be a nurturing space, because I think in most cases, or with the clients even that I've seen, anyone who'd be experiencing suicidal thoughts, in most cases they would be expressing feelings of being alone or lonely. So having to create that safe space for them, that nurturing space where they can feel free to be themselves and express themselves freely. Then practice an empathetic response, which could include phrases such as, I can't imagine how hard or painful this time is for you, but I'd like to try and understand, right? Because you're coming in with a clean slate. You're not coming in, even if you have experienced similar experiences with the person who is displaying such behavior or thought, it does not necessarily mean that you are both experiencing it the same way. So having to come in with a clean slate and avoid using judgmental words. So the wording is very, very important, because words have power. Words can create, words can build, and words can also destroy. So having to avoid such things as but why would you feel suicidal, or But this shouldn't be making you feel as suicidal. This is nothing compared to what so and so went through, or what I went through, etc. And then number 5, ask about their reasons for living and dying, and listen to their responses. Try your best to explore reasons for living in a greater details. So I think having to compare the two, reasons for living and reasons for dying, it's simply, yes, you'd be encouraging them to think more about the reasons for living, but also showing them, or being, open, sort of allowing them to give you more insight to why have they even, out of why have they gone through such an extensive amount of process for them to eventually get to a place where they are thinking of death when they could be. So I think it's for you to just help them compare the two, and instill or encourage the reasons for them to live more than the ones to die. I think with this, you'd also have to help them see the bigger picture to their problem, because they'll probably be feeling stuck, feeling like there's no other solution to the problem except just to remove themselves. So helping them see the bigger picture. Ask if they have a plan for ending their lives. So plan when there's an intent. That's very important to take note of, right? Maybe they have bought. Ask if they've been able to, if they were now arranging what they were going to utilize and when, where, such questions. I think, but also I think that this will depend on also how open is the person to you. Be very considerate of their be considerate of their willingness to express, and how have they made sense of this thought or this experience to them. So if they have thought of a plan, focus on discussing the people they either care about or whom they know care about them, and reassure them that this feeling won't last forever. I think ultimately the one of the core important factors or elements to helping someone who is struggling with suicidal thoughts or having gone through suicidal attempts is having to create that sense of hope for them. If you noticed, I've been mentioning sense of hopelessness, helplessness quite often, and loneliness. Those three are like cousins to creating that negative thought process of I feel suicidal, or I want to remove myself from the situation. So having to combat that by creating that sense of hopefulness, that sense of great meaning making, great gratitude around what do you have, and how do you make sense of it? How can you appreciate it? How can you see the light around this dark room that you are currently in? And then lastly, be proactive. those contemplating suicide often don't believe they can be helped. So don't wait for the person to reach out. Drop by or call them, initiate for a form of assistance for them. Do whatever it takes to make sure that they at the end of the day, their lives are saved, because their lives do matter. Their existence matters in their communities, in their families, in just the whole world at large. So your support is always, always very vital. Thank you.
Thank you, Nandi. And ladies and gents, I hope that if any of you are going through any of the things that we have mentioned here, any of the feelings, any of the thoughts, that the presentation has given you hope, given you things to think about, and we encourage you, please, to reach out for help. If you're a UKZN student, there are counselling services available in the different colleges. So in each college, in the health sciences, it's us. In the other 3 colleges, they also have their own team of counsellors. It's a free, confidential counselling. It's a safe space, so please make use of us. You're not alone. You don't have to go through this alone. Please, please, please reach out, get the help you need. And if you know someone who's in this situation, encourage them to reach out today and to get the help they need. So in closing, are there any questions or comments that you would like to ask or say? And other than that, otherwise it's goodbye from Nandi and myself. But just in closing, are there any comments that you would like to make, or any questions you would like to ask?
Thank you so much for this brilliant presentation. I think I've got something to say. Recently, I was called at Grace Hospital because there was a child who was sick, and the clinicians had a problem with the members of the family. I think because of the deteriorating condition of the child. The child was well, and then started complaining of a painful ankle. I mean, the heel. His heel was very painful. It was a 7-year-old child. And then I was called at Grace, and then to meet the parents of this child. So what actually happened, the child complained and then was taken to the clinic, where they couldn't see anything on X-ray, and he was given pain tablets. And the following day, the whole foot was swollen and very painful, and the child was taken to Edendale Hospital, where they decided to take the child to theater because of what they thought was wrong. And they did a sclerotomy. They started cutting because they thought maybe there was no blood in the foot. And then this was very serious. After the operation, the child's foot became dark, which means it was a sign of the fact that the foot is dead, no blood circulation. So was transferred to Grace Hospital. So and then at Grace, they called me to come and talk to the parents of this child. And then they also gave me numbers to call the parents so that they can, especially the father, because the mother was already at Grace Hospital. So before I went to Grace, I found out from the mother what actually happened, and then she explained as I have explained. And then I said I think they should consult a traditional healer and find out what's wrong with the child. So the mother said they had already consulted 2 healers, and who said the child had umeko, which means it was the child was somehow bewitched. So he went stepped over a very dangerous medicine. So, but I told them that I insisted that we also do a consultation with a traditional healer, so that we know why the ancestors were not able to protect this child. Because at Grace, when the child arrived, they said there was nothing they could do except amputating the foot of this 7-year-old child. And then I wanted to know why the ancestors didn't protect the child until the child is amputated. So we went for divination. We went for consultation with a traditional healer, and it was found that the ancestors of the mother's ancestors on the mother's side were very angry because a special cultural responsibility was not done. So, which means when the mother was pregnant, they didn't pay for the boy must pay when the female when he impregnates the female or his loved one. So, so the ancestors were very angry, and that is why the child was so sick. And then it was a very serious thing, because the ancestors were also going to, they were also fighting the ancestors, the mother's ancestors, and the child's father's ancestors were also fighting over this child. Each side claiming that this is our child. So it was a very serious situation, and the real owners of the child were the mother's ancestors. So they were also prepared to let it go, to let the child die. So it was a very difficult situation. The child, as we were busy with the divination, was in hospital, but we were at the consultation with the traditional healer where the traditional healer stays. It was so serious because they said what could save this child is that the young man should pay and also apologize. So when you pay for making your girlfriend pregnant, you need to pay. It's a matter of must. It's a cultural responsibility, and on top of that, he had to apologize by also paying something. It was very serious because this young man could not pay, was financially broke. He was working but didn't have money. That was the first thing. And so there was a lot of stress from the fact that the child's foot was amputated. There was a lot of stress. And there was also a problem, the relationship between the father of this child and the mother's brothers were also angry that they were not getting along. So the relationships were also very bad. So it's the crisis that the child was having that amputation. There was also financial problems. There was a severe stress. And another stress came from the fact that the father of this child, although he was working, but didn't have enough money, and he didn't also have a permanent job. So they were having short times. So, it was very difficult for him to raise all this money to pay immediately. So what actually happened, the ancestors eventually said they could perform a specific ritual at Iscot, where the mother's child came from, the uncles of this child. They could perform that ritual, slaughtering a chicken, and then take the gall of this chicken and you know, bring it to hospital and then start smearing this gall all over the body, and then requesting the ancestors, asking for life. And then miracles happened. Within 2 days, the child who was on a ventilator and doctors were waiting for this child to die, he started to improve. So these were great news, and I won't go more into that. But the point is, so when the child improved and then eventually was discharged, but was supposed to be taken back to his mother's home at Escort, where these angry ancestors are. So the mother took the child back home and stayed at home with the child. So the father stayed here in Maritzburg. No, he was left behind here. And then he was not even in good terms with his brothers-in-law. So what the thing is, the father, who was also having a lot of stress, who was not, you know, he was weak when I met them, very weak emotionally, drained. But recently, I've heard from the mother of this child that the father of this child attempted suicide. He took all the blood, all the blood pressure tablets, and he took them, and then he was very sick, and he was rushed to Edendale Hospital. He was admitted to ICU. And, you know, but fortunately, when I called the hospital, he recovered. He's now in an open ward. He has been discharged from the ICU, is now improving. So as you were telling us about the warning signs, I was just thinking about the life crisis, the financial problem, the stress, work stress, the relationship of this man with his brothers-in-law, although he's not married, and other factors. So really, this presentation was a very impressive, and everything that happened to this couple, to this young man, you know, and even the strategies and what we're supposed to do is very beneficial. So thank you so much for this presentation, and this is what I had to say, that yeah, this is a brilliant presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for sharing your story with us. We really, really appreciate it, and we're very glad that the child's dad is recovering in hospital, and hopefully things will start to improve. Nuns, did you want to say something?
Yes, no, thank you very much, Elliot. And indeed, you're right. There's so many factors that could contribute to suicide. Often it's not just one singular event or experience. It could be a variety of them all happening at the same time, which would eventually, you know, get the person to a place where they feel like they've reached a dead end. So yes, I'm glad that you could also pick up on some of the things that moving further you could be able to provide as a form of support to not only them, but to many other clients or patients that you'll be seeing in future. Thank you.
And I think now I'm also grateful that I've got something to say to the mother of this child, because she's back from Escort, you know, as to what she need to avoid, like being judgmental, asking questions. Why have you decided to kill yourself? all those things. I think all this information is gonna be very useful. Yeah, yes, thanks.
Absolutely.
You're welcome. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you so much for your engagement, and take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we'll see you again soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Everyone.